back in those days, we were still having to go to the library to pull out and shepherdize cases, right? And we didn't have Chat GPT or say, hey, give me an argument. We're actually having to do that. You had to write briefs. You had to present arguments. You had to be able to draw out the information from opposing counsel. When I onboard a client, the first conversation we have is that you never lie to me. You tell me the truth. And if you do lie, I will be submitting my withdrawal the very next day.
This is The Litigator's Edge, the podcast where smart strategy, practical innovation, and real-world experience come together to move litigation forward. Each week, we sit down with attorneys, legal tech leaders, and trusted advisors who are rethinking how great legal work gets done. You'll hear how law firms are building a competitive advantage. These conversations are grounded, insightful, and designed to help you refine how you work and how you win. Here is your host, Aniket Sawant.
Hello, and welcome to today's episode of The Litigator's Edge, the podcast where innovative attorneys reveal the strategies that have transformed their legal practice. My name is Aniket Sawant, and I'm co-founder and CEO of Threadeo. My guest today is a partner at Wong, Fleming and chair of the firm's corporate and immigration law practice, where he operates at the complex intersection of international investment, corporate finance, and real estate development. He began his career as a deputy prosecuting attorney in Kings County, Washington, and now counsels clients on matters as diverse as green energy projects and AI governance. It's my pleasure to welcome Shahzad Qadri to the podcast. Welcome, Shahzad, and thank you for being here.
Thank you, Aniket. Lovely to be here.
It's my pleasure. Shahzad, I always like to start each episode by asking each of my guests to share either a fun fact about themselves or a cringe joke. Which will it be for you, and what is it?
Let's go with a fun fact.
Please.
So I'm a proud father of 2 daughters, and that's a huge change for my family because I grew up in a household of boys, with my mom being the only female around. Now I have an 11-year-old and an 8-year-old. And recently, my 11-year-old has discovered Ulta and Sephora. And I have, in the last month, spent an average of 2.5 hours a week at Sephora or Ulta. And much to my wife's dismay, because her thing was every time we would go there, I go 5 minutes, let's get out of here. So I guess I'm a girl dad, or turning into a girl dad, and apparently that's my life for the next 15 years.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Shah. The next question I'd like to ask every attorney, and it's a privilege for me to speak to attorneys such as yourself, is that I believe that every attorney who makes time to be on the podcast is a superhero, and every superhero has an origin story, and I'd love to learn yours.
Sure. I appreciate the compliment, Aniket. I don't know if I see myself as a superhero, but certainly do have a story. Being of South Asian origin, and you could probably relate to this, Aniket, all our parents want us to become doctors. And my father was no different. He's a mechanical engineer by trade and deathly afraid of needles, yet he wanted me and my brother both to become doctors. And I wouldn't say I walked to my own drumbeat, because I do come from a family of lawyers. My mother's family, my maternal grandfather was an extremely well-known attorney in Pakistan. He was one of the top tax attorneys, and certainly very well respected, a very brilliant man, as well as a very humble man. So I was certainly inspired by him. But like all us South Asian kids, I was the firstborn, and I was like, hey, I'm going to be a doctor, because that's what's expected. Went to University of Washington, got all my pre-med credentials done. And my 3rd year, I decided, this is not going to work. I can't cut things open. I can't stand the sight of blood. Switched my majors. Did not tell my dad, because we were already beefing about my future plans. Told my mom, and my mom was like, okay, well, I'm not getting in the middle of this. And went into getting a degree in journalism. Got into law school. My dad still thought that I got a pre-med degree until he came to my commencement, and was diligently informed by one of my friend's parents that, oh yeah, he went to the School of Arts. And I remember my brother texting me, my younger brother. He goes, hey, just like Dad just found out that you didn't get a science degree. I remember like, oh God, how am I going to deal with this? But my saving grace was that I had gotten admitted into law school, and 2 weeks later I was starting law school. So I think the wrath, my dad's wrath, and he's a very gentle soul, but when it comes to comes to education, it was a different kind of standard. I proceeded, and I would like to think he's proud of me today. But I will say, even now, if we get into an argument, he goes, "This wouldn't have happened if you were a doctor today." So you get that, but but things are good. So that's kind of my origin story there.
That's amazing. I mean, I can identify with some of the things that you said there, Shahzad. So thank you for sharing that. Yeah, it's interesting that certain things your parents or others in your extended family, especially if you're from certain cultures, they just won't let you live it down, no matter how much success one accomplishes, as you clearly have. So thank you for sharing that. Let's talk about your career post law school. So, from what I understand, Shahzad, your career began in a very different place than you are now. So, you started off as a deputy prosecuting attorney in Kings County. Can you tell us a little bit about what that was like, and then what prompted your transition from that environment to essentially a transactional attorney and doing all the wonderful things that you're doing today?
Definitely, my path was not planned. And just to give you a little bit of background, I graduated law school at the age of 20. So I really didn't know what was going on. I'm first generation in the US. My dad was a executive for an oil company in Saudi Arabia. My mom has a master's in political science, but by the virtue of the fact that we were in Saudi Arabia, she was a homemaker. She didn't really work outside the home. When I started law school, I didn't know what avenues there were, what kind of internships I needed to do to basically mold my career. I thought I wanted to be a corporate attorney because it sounded sexy, it sounded exciting. I had seen all these shows, and I didn't necessarily want to be in front of a judge getting humiliated every single day. But right at the time I graduated and I passed the bar, we had the huge dot-com burst. So there were law firms that were shutting down. All of a sudden, all these tech companies that were hiring attorneys were laying them off. And I was like, dang, I need a job. And one of two reasons. One, I was like, I worked this hard. I need to be doing something. Two, I was like, oh, good God, I'm never going to hear the end of it from my dad. He's going to come back and say, hey, if you were a doctor, this would not be happening. So a professor of mine and I had taken, I think it was criminal procedure with him. He was an adjunct and he was actually working for the prosecutor's office. So I went and talked to him. He's like, hey, look, we have positions for deputy prosecutors. Why don't you give that a shot? I think it will look good on your resume. And I'm like, it's a job. I'll take it. Keeping in mind that during law school, while I had done appellate arguments and some mock trials, I had no intentions of ever being in the courthouse. I was like, nope, don't want to do this. This is what I want to do. And now I was thrust starting off at the district court level. First day at the job, I was handed, I believe it was about 75 files and said, hey, show up at court at 8 a.m. in front of the judge. And here's a script. And I remember sitting there with these 75 files. I'm like, are they crazy? How the heck am I going to be dealing with this? But it was also one of those things where once I started doing this, I realized how invaluable that experience was because it made me think on my feet. It gave me a confidence which I probably didn't have being a 20-year-old where majority of people coming to law school here at that time, it was a second career for them, or at least they had been in the workforce. So they were in their 30s. And at that time, 30 seemed like, oh my God, they're so old, right? And having to hold your own as well. And that is something that position taught me because I was in the driver's seat. I held the ability to dismiss a case or move forward to a trial. No one could really question that. I questioned that. And just being able to, or having to actually being compelled to think on my feet, it gave me that confidence that I was like, okay, I can do it. And today, when I tell my associates, because of that experience, you can stick me in any position. I no longer am worried about being humiliated. I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to be embarrassed because I don't know this. It just kind of gave you that confidence and encourage all young attorneys. I was like, what? Yes, you want to be a transactional attorney. You want to be a corporate attorney. That's great. But you need to find a way to get into court during your formative years. I have friends that started off as transactional attorneys, whether they were in-house, small firms, large firms, you name it. And 20, 25 years in, you tell them to go to court and they'll freak out because they don't have that experience. So that's kind of what my start was. I started off in the district court, which I was dealing with misdemeanors and gross misdemeanors. So it was assaults and driving while license suspended, DUI cases. By the time I ended my career at the prosecutor's office, I was doing felonies and felony pleas. I was working with a sexual assault unit, and then from there, I transitioned into a civil litigation firm, doing what I would say compared to criminal law was a lot really boring. It was asbestos work. It was insurance defense work, but it gave me from a different perspective.
That's fascinating. I thank you for sharing all of that. And there's something in there, Shahzad, that you touched upon, which I wanted to sort of dig a little bit deeper into. So you said that you graduated law school at the age of 20. That's remarkable. When did you graduate college, and how did all of that come to be?
So we moved here from Saudi in the mid to late 90s, and I was going to a British school there. And when they started converting my credits, I had far exceeded the credits that was required to graduate from high school. So I'll give you an idea. So the district that I was going to school in Washington State required 24 credits, and when I was enrolled in school, I was at 62. So they're like, oh, and I was at a private school in Saudi Arabia. I was not challenged by the American public school system. So I ended up taking a lot of college classes in high school, and then started the University of Washington. So I was done with my bachelor's degree by 17. I started in about 2 years. So I started about 15, and then I laugh because I tell people that I wasn't legally allowed to go into a bar until about a year after I graduated from law school, which it dampened my efforts to become that popular kid, because people go, "Hey, let's go." And I was so paranoid about getting caught with a fake ID, and not being able to sit for my license. I was like, "Oh no, that's okay." They're like, "What do you mean you can't go to a bar?" I'm like, "Well, let me tell you all that."
That's remarkable, Shahzad. Thank you for sharing that. And the reason I asked that is because that means that when you were coming back to your prosecuting attorney role, or deputy prosecuting attorney role, not only was it early in your career relative to some of the other folks that you mentioned who started off as transactional attorneys, but you were in absolute age terms also way younger than maybe other folks who were also early in their career. So that's remarkable. So yeah, I just wanted to sort of double tap on that a little bit. That's great. So now moving to your post sort of prosecuting attorney world, and then you mentioned a little bit about the work that you did at the civil firm afterwards. Can you talk us through your journey from there to where you are today, where you're the chair of the corporate immigration law practice at Wong Fleming?
Yeah. So it was a natural transition. And I think being in Seattle, the corporate jobs were far and few. At that time, we were not a corporate hub. Either you went in-house, or like the major companies were hiring the big mega New York firms, and you're working out of New York. So generally the firms that were hiring were primarily litigation firms. I ended up at about 150 attorney firm doing insurance defense. That was a huge change. And the reason was, as a prosecutor, on average, my cases would resolve within 6 months on a high end, unless there was a very high profile case. But I was too new to be doing any high profile cases at that point. I came into this civil law firm, and there were cases that had been going on for 5, 6, 7 years. The firm I was working at also represented the Catholic Archdiocese, and that was the time where the whole sexual abuse scandal sort of blew up. And so they basically set aside a team of attorneys that would represent the Catholic Archdiocese. The Archdiocese had a lot of rules and how they wanted their things dealt with. Not all 150 attorneys had access to all their documents. I was on that team, and I laughed because I was the only non-Catholic, non-white attorney on that team. and I was their spokesperson. So I still wonder to this day is like what made them find a Pakistani guy of a Muslim background to be their spokesperson. I don't know the fact that my mom went to a convent for our college, but that was the only association I had with Muslim. But it allowed me to kind of see a different perspective on the discovery aspect. It allowed me to sit back and problem solve and say, okay, well, these are the issues that we are dealing with. These are the issues that we may deal with. And also sort of hone my trial skills on a different level where you had to write briefs, you had to present arguments, you had to be able to draw out the information from opposing counsel. And this was stuff that we didn't really have to deal with in a criminal setting. I remember doing my first deposition, and that was nerve wracking. I'm like, what do you want me to do, and how do you do it? And you have your rule book and whatnot. So it gave me an exposure to a lot of different areas, and I think one thing I realized while I was in the civil lit arena is it doesn't matter what area of law you're familiar with. If you're a good litigator, you can litigate anything. And I'm sure there are attorneys that don't agree with me. Yes, you have your subject matter expertise, but I can sit here today and say, what? I could probably prosecute a patent case and litigate it because I have that training as a litigator, and basically have that skill set that is needed. So when people come out and come to me and say, well, I only do this kind of litigation, that's great. I mean, you've basically developed an expertise, but that doesn't preclude you from doing litigating in other areas, because if you're a litigator, and you should be able to walk in and litigate a family law case versus a insurance defense case, because it's the underlying skill set of your presentation, getting discovery done, understanding, and basically finding the resources. I think that's the big thing. And back in those days, we were still having to go to the library to pull out and shepherdized cases, right? And we didn't have Chat GPT or say, hey, give me an argument. We're actually having to do that. So I thought, so those formative years, I think, just gave me the skill set that I found extremely important in even my transactional practice. I think when people say, oh, what would a litigator do in a transactional practice? I was like, actually quite a bit, because I think my approach to transactional work is probably quite different than what a litigator, someone who doesn't have the litigation experience, how they would be dealing with it.
Yeah, no, that there's so many threads in there, Shahzad. And one of the things that I found interesting is you clearly have this philosophy of, hey, let me be a generalist with a very broad skill set as a litigator. And to your point of, hey, if you're a litigator, you can essentially litigate anything. And it's fascinating to me how that translates into the breadth of the work that you've done. I mean, as I was doing research on your profile, I mean, you've done everything from AI privacy and governance to the archdiocese work that you mentioned, to green energy projects. And so I just find that very interesting that it's not this specific vertical that sort of drives your professional profile. It's actually the skill sets that you have that you apply to these different verticals, which is very interesting.
Yeah, and I think you're hitting the nail on the head. I think what my experience allowed me to do is pivot. Because I think what often happens is that attorneys box themselves into such a vertical that when they need to pivot, they can't, because you just like, I don't know how to do this. And what I believe in how I train my associates, and this is, I think, a firm philosophy, is that we want to truly train you to be counselors, where you can issue spot. You may not have the expertise to go into the depth, but if I'm counseling you, I should be able to say, Aniket, you have a privacy issue, you have an AI issue, you have a issue dealing with indemnification, versus saying, oh yeah, I have no idea. I don't see you have a contract issue per se, because that's my expertise. You need to go hire five other people. And if you actually look at it historically, and I always wonder about that, traditionally we were trained to be counselors. I think it's a modern phenomenon where we could get so specialized that we can't look beyond things. Even within a subfield, we have subspecializations. I've met attorneys in the world of immigration that only do H-1Bs. And right now I'm getting calls like, because their work is drying up. I'd be like, what do we do now? Right. And I know I had seen that early in my career that I never wanted to be in that position. And I think the other part of it is my personality. I don't like to get bored, and I get bored really quickly. So I'm like, dude, I need to doing something constantly, because I think if I only had to do one thing day in and day out, I would be so bored that I'd be like, guys, this is just not working. So I think for the younger attorneys that I mentor, that I talk to, I teach at University of Washington. I tell them, I go in with the mindset that you are going to be a counselor. And that while you may want to just do copyrights, maybe you do just want to do, energy work. Don't push away work, get the experience, because you never know where it may help you. And it gives you a broader perspective on how to tackle problems.
That's great. I mean, I would also imagine, Shahzad, that the perspective that you gain, there might be potentially even some cross-pollination. So something that you learned in your energy work could hypothetically apply to some governance or privacy type work, and that's unique to a generalist, which may be a urban place.
And I think, as I mentioned, I said, as a litigator turning transactional, I think it's made me a better lawyer, because when I am drafting those contracts or negotiating those deals, I'm not only thinking about the terms of those deals or what the best terms are. I'm also thinking that, hey, if we get sued on this contract, what do I need to have? What kind of clauses do I need to have in place to protect my client? And far too often, purely transactional attorneys who don't have that perspective will not have that perspective. They'll come back with this beautiful agreement, but they don't have a dispute resolution clause, or they don't have this indemnification clause. And we're having a conversation, and they're like, "Well, why would we put the?" I go, "Well, if you get sued, you want to make sure that, because what they're thinking is, my problem is the transaction. If something goes south, it's going to be the litigator's problem. I don't really care." And I think because of that, I have personally been able to set myself apart when I am competing for contracts, when I am putting in these bids, and gone in and say, hey, that this is a great contract, but you guys didn't think about A, B, and C. And the reality is a purely transactional attorney probably wouldn't have been able to think about this, because they have never been in that situation.
Makes sense. Switching gears a little bit to the practice that you officially chair, which is the corporate immigration law and the EB-5 investor visa program and so forth. A couple of things. What does your practice within that vertical, although obviously you have skills across verticals, what does your practice within that vertical entail? And how does it tie into, for our broader audience, some of the projects and the these bids that you mentioned? What's the connection, if there is?
So within the corporate vertical, I am doing a lot of tech transactions just by the virtue of the fact where I'm at. So basically, that's negotiating contracts, drafting contracts, basically coming up with policies and procedures relating to those contracts, negotiating the data protection addendums, because privacy is a huge deal. And now we have the AI governance and stuff. So that all kind of is packaged into that. Depending on the client, I am also involved in developing their privacy programs within in their organization. There are AI programs, AI governance, and I hate to use the word expert for both those arenas, because I don't believe anyone can be an expert, because it's such an evolving area. So when people go, well, an AI expert, I'm like, oh great, I want to meet this person, because so when people go, are you an expert? I go, no, I'm not an expert. I'm a student of AI. I think I'm on the forefront because I am involved with it, but there are probably people that have more knowledge, and it's just an evolving area, and I think it's going to continue to be an evolving area. So that kind of comes within my vertical for my corporate work. Within the immigration, we have the EB-5. That was my bread and butter for a very long time. And within that EB-5, there was a cross-pollination of corporate work, because I was also doing the securities work. Instead of hiring that third party, I was doing the security work. Today, I'm doing the compliance work. So making sure, they're compliant with the immigration laws, with the securities laws, state registrations. And then I, just by virtue, because they know where to stick it, I am doing the whole gamut from the family-based to the investment-based to visas. And when I said the whole gamut, I'm literally overseeing it. I have a team of attorneys, but being able to sit down with them and brainstorm now the policies, training in-house counsel to what they need to look at or how they need to pivot. So right now, in a lot of our tech clients, especially the smaller companies, the conversation is if we can't afford to do H-1Bs, how do we bring in people? Is the L1 intra-company transfers an option? Investors on the E2, how do we bring them here? So there are just basically a policy formulation and literally consulting with them to kind of figure out what direction they should be headed.
That's great. I want to move a little bit to looking beyond the borders of the United States. So international investments, for example, or international investors, I should say.
Yeah.
So you've done some pretty massive projects: a $650 million green energy project, a $240 million multi-use project, and I'm sure many others. What are some lessons or key takeaways that you would be willing to share with our audience when it comes to how you manage the complexity, the risk involved with projects like this,
Yeah.
especially if they involve international investors?
So the reality of it is within that framework, there are a lot of compliance requirements. Unfortunately, when you're dealing with businesses, and I don't think there's any nefarious intent, but they want to move things fast. And you'll always get that client. They go, hey, we have clients, we just need to move these things fine. So they tend to play fast and loose a lot of times. And I learned early on in my career is you can't play fast and loose. The one thing that I can't emphasize enough is that you need to be able to sleep at night with the decisions you've made. I think I have on more than one occasion, and luckily I have been in position to do that, have turned away clients who would have been very, very lucrative because I didn't feel good about it. If nothing else, I pride myself in being a very ethical lawyer, and I will not blur lines to make an extra buck. And I'm very, 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 very clear to my clients about a couple things. When I onboard a client, the first conversation we have is that you never lie to me. You tell me the truth. And if you do lie to me, I will be submitting my withdrawal the very next day. And there have been a handful of times that I've had to do that. And has it hurt financially? Yes, it has hurt us significantly financially, but I saw that there was no other way. I'm not going to compromise my ethics to keep a client. So having boundaries, setting those boundaries becomes very, very, very important. And I think the biggest problem attorneys, I guess, fall into is when they allow clients to push their boundaries. Because the reality of it, I think, is human nature is you give an inch, they'll want a foot. Or you give a foot, they'll want a mile. And it's hard often. It's a really hard. And I think for me, it was even harder because of the cultural background where you give deference to your elders. So I would have clients who are my grandfather's age and they're telling me to do something. I'm like, I can't. And they're like, why not? But I think if you feel you can't sleep at night, it's not worth doing. So, and when we're dealing with laws as lawyers, we're guardians of the law. We're there to protect the Constitution. There are interpretations, yes, but I tell everyone, don't push it. Don't push the barrier that's been placed. And because that barrier, whether you agree with it or not, has been put there. And as a lawyer, you have committed to upholding that. So tell your clients the truth. Say, hey, we can't do that. They may not like it, and they probably will find a lawyer that will do it. But it's not gonna be me.
That's great. Well, words to live by for any attorney or really any professional. So thank you for sharing that, Shahzad. Moving to an adjacent area, you spoke about ethics, you spoke about culture. And on a related note, you have a rare expertise in Islamic finance and estate planning, and you've published multiple articles on this topic. For those listeners who may not be familiar with this area, can you please explain at a high level the core principles of Islamic finance and describe how you would structure a transaction within that framework while also keeping it compliant with the US framework.
Definitely. So Islamic finance is a huge, huge industry worldwide. Unfortunately, the US is, I think, about 10 to 15 years behind this area field. Now, let me make it very clear that you don't have to be of the Muslim faith to take advantage of Islamic finance. Japan has issued municipal bonds, which are Sharia compliant. The UK has issued bonds which are Sharia compliant. In essence, what Sharia compliant products, and we're talking about financial products, so whether these are loans, we're talking about leases, we're talking about derivatives, whatnot, is based on a premise of fairness. And basically, the idea is that we are going to avoid usury. So under the Islamic faith, and those who are staunch followers, they will not pay interest or receive interest. So a lot of banks in the Muslim world, while there are conventional banks, there are also Islamic banks which operate on a model of profit sharing. So if the bank makes money, you make money. Bank loses money, you don't. Mortgages are also sort of a profit sharing model, and the best way to describe it is that if I purchase a house, so with a Islamic bank in Dubai, I put down 40% and they put down 60%. So there's basically an ownership. They own 60% and I own 40%. And as I'm paying down my mortgage interest free, I'm buying a piece each month. So by the end of the year, I may now own 50%. But we both have equal liability in the sense that now that we both own 50-50 of the home, that basically means that if the house burns down, I don't end up holding the bag of paying back the entire amount. The bank will take that hit for 50%, and I'll take that hit for 50%. This is not an unusual concept. Boeing uses Islamic leases, they'll call ijara, to lease out planes to the Emirates and Qatar and a lot of other airlines. And what that does is that it's a lease. They're paying you a fee, and the fee could be whatever they charge to cover their expenses. But if a plane crashes and it has been leased, Boeing will still hold on to liability because they are going to be carrying the insurance on that, versus the way we are structuring things here, where I may do a lease to option, but if something goes wrong, I'm still left holding the bag at the end of the day. So it's a sense of equity. We're seeing more and more banks trying to enter that field. So just the other day, a bank out of Washington, D.C. called me, and they have launched Sharia compliant deposits, Sharia compliant savings. I think the bank is Stearns Bank. So you're seeing people saying, "Hey, this is a huge demographic that we need to serve," and there's a lot of money within the Muslim population in the U.S. And surprisingly, which is crazy, is what we're seeing is the current generation that is born and raised in the U.S. is far more religious and orthodox than my generation is. So they're looking for products. They're saying, "Hey, what if you have products that are catering to the Orthodox Jews, or it's catering to the Christian population? Why can't you have products?" So I think it is going to be a growing area. I think there are a lot of misconceptions about it. It isn't a sign that we're going to become an Islamic state. It's just a very equitable product that is an untapped market.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that, Shahzad. Especially, I didn't know a lot of those nuances, and I especially appreciated your sharing the very practical example of these well-known Middle Eastern airlines and how the relationship with airline manufacturers works. So thanks for that. Switching gears to the work that you do, not in your profession, but outside in the community. So you have leadership roles in various organizations, the Refugee Women's Alliance, National Minority Supplier Diversity Council. You mentioned before we got on air here about you were at a conference for minority and women-owned law firms. Can you please share a little bit more about the work that you do with each of these organizations and how that sort of shapes you as a lawyer and as a person?
Aniket, I believe that when you come from a position of privilege, and I've been very lucky throughout my life to come from a privileged family, um, I think it's incumbent upon you to give back in any way you can. A lot of us from the South Asian background, we come from privileged backgrounds, but we're first generation here, so we had to find our way. And there are a lot. While I hate to use this term, with this administration, DEI is dead. I mean, to a certain degree, but every one of us needs someone to help us get to the next level, whether it's through education, whether it's through connections, whether it's through introduction. When someone, yes, you can be self-made, but to become self-made, you need people around you who are there to give you a pat on the back, provide you guidance, and provide you that mentorship you need. So the organizations that I have been involved in does that. And the National Minority Supplier Diversity Council provides trainings, provides opportunities for minority businesses who are traditionally been excluded from our mainstream opportunities. So the idea is that how do we get them in there? With the Refugee Women's Alliance, these are people who don't necessarily want to be here. They were forced to be here. You see some really sad stories. You see proud people from all over the world. And there are these doctors and professionals who were extremely successful in their countries, and now they're in this foreign country. And you and I know the South Asian culture. Asking someone for help, it's hard. It's extremely hard. And you see these individuals, and you start talking to them. You realize how brilliant these people were, and how they were forced out. Uh, so my goal through these organizations is always to give people back their dignity and not make it a handout. Because I think sometimes when we are trying to help, we make it worse because these really proud people are having to turn to these organizations. And here you are making them feel even smaller because you're like, so you making sure how you present it or how you offer help. I can give you an example. I'm from a Muslim family, and during the month of Ramadan, we generally sponsor refugee families for their entire meals and their groceries and whatnot. And what we've started doing, and one option is just sending money to this organization, and they'll buy the groceries and go deliver it. My wife and I decided that we actually wanted to deliver this ourselves with our daughters for a couple of reasons: to build empathy, and then to really show them how privileged they are. So this year we had the privilege of meeting this Syrian refugee family. They had three little girls close to my girl's age. We bought the groceries, and my wife went one step further, and she bought them Eid presents and chocolates, which were not part of the list. And we got there, rang the doorbell, and before they accepted anything, they insisted we come in. Gave us a tea, got juice for the girls with what very little they had. And as we started talking to them, the wife had a PhD in Syria in microeconomics, and now she was working in the back kitchen of a Mediterranean restaurant. The husband was an executive in an oil company, and had, I think, a PhD in mechanical engineering, and he was Ubering. Their English was broken. Um, and as we were leaving, the wife just broke down, and she said, "You guys um, saw us. You made us feel human again, because the hardest thing for us is to um, turn to these organizations and ask for help, but we don't know what to do. We have three kids to feed. So I mean, if my one introduction, me reviewing someone's proposal, can get them business, it's worth the time I spend. I think there are lots of communities that need help, even within the South Asian community. And you probably know that, and I'm going to use a Urdu term, that it's called Safad Posh, because these are people from very respected families back home who are hard on times, but will not turn to people for help. And when you reach out and you help with nothing in return or without demeaning them, it changes their lives. And I've seen kids of a lot of these individuals now be successful in college. Now they've turned around and come back to us and say, "Hey, this is what happened." And one last story: when we moved here, my dad he's an oil executive, went into the oil business. We had about 25 gas stations, and we had a gentleman that used to work for us. And about 15 years ago, at some point, I think, needed some money beyond what my dad was paying him. And my dad wrote him a check with no expectation. It was about $2,500. And just last week, his son calls my dad up and he goes, I want to come over and see you. And that's like, "Sure, you're welcome." He comes in and he's graduated from college, doing really well, I think, in the IT world. And he goes, "Uncle, I have something for you." He hands my dad an envelope. And my dad, "What is this?" And he goes, "I don't know if you remember, but about 15 years ago, you gave my dad $2,500. And that changed our lives then. And I just want to pay this back to you." And it was one of those things that was really heartfelt. And my dad's like, "Oh, no, I didn't give it." And he insisted because he's like, "I'm in a position to do this." He goes, "Just don't change it. Just give it to someone else. But I can." So it's those little things, I think, gives you faith in humanity, right? I mean, and I think the only thing I can say is that when you do get involved in these organizations, do it because you want to make a difference without any expectations. Because if you're going in there saying, "Hey, I expect to get connected to Aniket, or I get expected to get to connect to Shahzad because they'll give me business," then you're going to be bitter, because that's not what these organizations are about, and shouldn't be what these organizations are about.
Wow. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, Shahzad. I mean, those are some profoundly moving and really satisfying stories to hear. And they really do restore one's faith in humanity, as you mentioned. It is interesting, right? That sometimes all you need to do is help people while maintaining or being aware of their dignity, and doing it in a way that doesn't seem demeaning and that enables them to talk to you with their heads held high. And that also, yeah,
How do I say it? Exactly. And I mean, and I think when you give respect, at least, and I was always taught that, and I truly believe that, they give you respect. And one thing my parents have taught me, and have always said, is like, when you're gone, the amount of money you had, or what car you drove, or which neighborhood you lived in, won't really matter. It was basically the person you were, and how people perceived you. And that's I think, words that I live by. That's what we're hoping to teach our girls, and at least have that empathy, which I think the world needs today.
absolutely. Shahzad, this has been an incredibly fulfilling, moving conversation on so many levels. I really do appreciate it. One final question for you.
Yes, sir.
Is there a question that I should have asked you, but I didn't?
No, I mean, I like to talk, as you can see, so and especially it's been fun talking to you, so we could have gone on for hours. But I mean, I would like to say, please keep on doing what you're doing, because I think the diverse voices that you are bringing to the forefront is going to shape this nation, and I think we need that more than ever right now.
Thank you. I really do appreciate that. Well, Shahzad, it's been a pleasure speaking with you. I learned a lot, and I'm sure our audience will as well. So thank you again for your time and all of your insights.
Well, thank you so much, Aniket, and please, if you're ever in the Pacific Northwest, look me up. I look forward to meeting in person someday.
Likewise, for you in San Francisco as well. Take care.
Pleasantly. Thanks, Aniket.
The Litigator's Edge podcast requires more than a conversation. It takes action, research, and collective wisdom. If today's episode resonated with you, we'd love to hear your insights. Join the conversation and help us shape the future together. We'll be back with more stories, strategies, and real-world solutions that are making a difference for everyone. In the meantime, be sure to subscribe, rate, write a review, and share it with someone you think would benefit from it too. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.